Ah, Nier Replicant, you beautiful, divisive, exceptional, frustrating piece of chaotic art. I started the gaming conversation as a vessel to articulate the many thoughts and feelings I have when playing video games, rather than just scouring forums looking for ending theories and critical essays all by myself. I wanted to share my thoughts with a wider audience. At the same time, I wasn't interested in being a pure game review channel. Through my videos, I hoped that I could relay an appreciation for games as an art form, not just providing a score and some recommendations, but also putting each game into a much wider context. Nier Replicant version, well, you know, the remaster, is a game that encourages many different conversations. And out of all the games I've featured so far on my channel, it stands out as one that gave me the absolute most to think about. Masterpiece, confusing, repetitive, shocking, life-changing. Somehow all of these phrases tie together to sum up how I felt about Nier Replicant. Regardless of all my conflicted feelings, Nier Replicant is a masterpiece. A triumph that demonstrates why games should be held in the same regard as movies, TV shows and paintings, as pieces of art for which the player can draw various different interpretations and be encouraged to express many different feelings. But, at the same time, how much did I actually enjoy playing this game? This is a thought that I've wrestled with since playing Nier Replicant a few months ago, and I'm hoping in this video I can put this thought to rest. Welcome to the gaming conversation. We make regular gaming reviews, critiques and investigations. For more videos, please consider subscribing. Today, we take a look at a game that had a profound effect on me, as a reviewer, as a gamer, even as a person. At the same time, I also have certain opinions about Nier Replicant that might be a little bit controversial. This video will not be a word-for-word recital of the narrative, but at the same time, if you intend to play Nier Replicant, I would recommend watching this video after you've played the game and at least one of the additional endings. Anyway, without any further intermissions, let's explore the tragedy of Nier Replicant. Acting as a follow-up to Yoko Taro's controversial Drakengard series, Nier Replicant opens with a beautiful cinematic as a young boy defends his sister from these shade-like beings in 2053's dystopic rendition of Tokyo. After fighting off these beings and introducing the game's combat, which we'll touch on later, your sister is suddenly suffering from some sort of illness, seemingly as a result of touching a mysterious black book nearby. The clock then moves forward 1,412 years later to a distinctly medieval looking setting. Already, questions begin to gather about what exactly has happened. This curiosity that I had was turned up about 10 levels when you see the spitting image of the young boy in this future setting, who is looking after his sister Yona, who also looked rather familiar. Intriguing. Yona is suffering from an illness called the Black Scroll. This situation is what provides the brother, our playable hero, with the motivation to drive the narrative forward. I went into this game aware that Yoko Taro's work has a tendency to be heavily dressed in subversion, with philosophy and other sophisticated and even darker themes being explored liberally. And with this in the back of my mind, the initial generic premise and plain world was something that I didn't quite trust. You see, Nier Replicant is one of the most brilliantly subversive forms of media that I have ever experienced. The game's initial premise is, to be honest, incredibly unremarkable, on the surface at least. Your goal is clear: save your sister. The setting is generic, medieval. And the antagonists, the shade-like entities that plague this world, are straight out of the JRPG generic monster playbook. Their immaterial form and incoherent grunts do little to leave a strong impression. But the awareness of the game's director's nature kept me curious. Is this really the best that such a revered artist in gaming could come up with? And those little hooks, like the characters bearing such a strong resemblance to people from over a millennium ago, needed to be explored. Well, without spoiling too much, this initially banal premise evolves into something far, far more interesting. Every single concern I had about the game's world and themes from my initial hours of play was deliberately orchestrated by Yoko Taro, or at least that is my interpretation. Whilst looking to cure Yona remains the main driving force for the player, along the way the mysteries of this world slowly begin to unravel. Grimoire Vice, a magical, witty talking tome, forms a bond with you, and his very nature becomes another narrative hook for the player. Kaine, who is equipped with more swear words than articles of clothing, might seem like fan service initially, but again, every iota of her character, her appearance and her personality, has substance and purpose. Even the seemingly generic antagonists are well developed. On that front, that is all I'll say. What I'm trying to get at here is that Nier Replicant masterfully subverts the player's expectations. The first 5-10 hours of the game follow a relatively conventional JRPG premise and formula. However, it's this setup that enables all of Yoko Taro's crazy twists and revelations to have even more impact. Despite knowing the nature of his work, I was still absolutely shocked by certain developments. This is a testament to how well he has juxtaposed a simple premise with layers and layers of mystery and heavy themes. The success of Nier Replicant's subversiveness can also be attributed to the game's structure. This is a game that requires multiple playthroughs to reach the 5 main endings. Crucially, the multiple playthroughs are what enables this game to so brilliantly subvert expectations. Many of the thoughts and feelings that I had after the first playthrough were completely changed in Route B, which comes after the first ending. Route B completely changed my view on the world of Nier Replicant, on the characters and the choices they made. While structurally, the gameplay and narrative is nearly identical, the shift in perspective is so dramatic that it fundamentally changes the nature of the story. The way this was executed from a narrative standpoint is masterful. Add in the other endings and what you have is a story and characters that consistently develop in unexpected, shocking and exciting ways. In this way, Nier Replicant deserves to be revered as a piece of art that transcends gaming. It deserves all the verbose, fluffy praise that I've given it. However, there is a reason as to why I titled this video, The Tragedy of Nier Replicant. Nier Replicant is amazing in so many ways. The story is one of the most compelling and well told that I've experienced in gaming. Nier Replicant is also a video game, and to be honest, I'm not really sure how much of a good game it is. Let's discuss, shall we? Everyone has their different reasons for playing games. The story, characters, music, gameplay, and graphics are all factors that players weigh against each other in different ways. Nier Replicant is undeniably a narrative and character heavyweight, but Nier Replicant isn't a visual novel that demands less interaction in favour of the story and simple decision making. Gameplay is a prominent factor here, and in between the excellent story beats, you will spend a great deal of time engaging with the world and the game's combat. This is where the tragedy of Nier Replicant begins. I didn't enjoy playing this game.
Nani?
There, I said it. Now hold on, sheath your pitchforks and don't light that fire just yet. I am so grateful that I experienced this masterpiece of a title. Everything I said in the previous section still stands, and there is more praise on the horizon. But, and this is a big old but, the moment-to-moment gameplay of Nier Replicant just isn't very good. Certainly not by modern standards, and definitely not in comparison to the excellent story and characters. Combat is an area that the remaster was particularly devoted to improving. I hadn't played the original, but based on research, the combat wasn't particularly well regarded at the time, and in comparison to the original title, there has been a big improvement. The game is an action RPG through and through, with quick combos, a flashy dodge, and all the other basic aspects of an action RPG. Fundamentally, the basic combat here is solid, if a bit unremarkable. However, in a game that is so remarkable in so many other areas, the rather basic combat stands out even more, for the worse. My biggest issues with the combat are the lack of enemy variety, which aside from bosses, consists of fairly uninteresting mobs of shades and animals, and also the lack of depth. Basic encounters severely lack in enemy variety, and whilst the game does introduce a couple new variants later on, it is so few and far between that encounters quickly become repetitive. This repetitiveness is further exasperated by how little the combat develops. Sealed verses, which are pretty awesome dark magic abilities, including summoning blades from the ground, turning the game into an FPS with your blast, and even uppercutting enemies with a big hand, are unfortunately the extent to which the combat adds new elements. I really enjoyed unlocking each of these abilities, but sadly, it's not long before you've collected them all, and thus have seen pretty much all the game has to offer moveset wise. There is no skill tree or similar system that you often find in these types of games. Instead, progression comes in the form of unlocking new weapons and words. Weapon-wise, there are three main types: one-handed swords, spears, and cloud-esque two-handed swords. Each type feels different, and there is definitely some fun to be had between switching between them on the fly. As the game progresses, you unlock higher level weapons for each type, which provide an aesthetic and stat change. Each weapon even has an associated story with it, which you unlock more of by upgrading the weapon. Again, Replicant nails the narrative and world building aspects here, but this greatness is undermined by failures on the gameplay side. Upgrading weapons in this game is incredibly tedious, requiring a heavy amount of grinding and luck, and with over 30 plus unique weapons, it just didn't feel worth enduring the tedium of gameplay required to get all the weapons and stories fully complete. Words are an interesting buff system for your weapons, spells, and martial arts, which really means your dodges. By defeating shades, you unlock various different words throughout your many playthroughs. Some provide simple stat buffs, whilst others add unique properties to your moves, such as paralyze or poison effects. Whilst I really liked the concept, there just isn't enough variety in terms of words to keep the gameplay interesting. Stopping enemies with paralyzing sealed verses or confusing them with your sword is fun, but for a game that requires numerous playthroughs with little enemy variety, the system just wasn't anywhere deep enough to hold my interest. Sadly, the combat is very much the lesser of two evils that ails Nier Replicant. If the game was, say, 20 hours instead of 40 plus, I think the combat system is serviceable, and at times capable of providing frantic fun. Where Nier Replicant really suffers is with its open world design. Firstly, Nier Replicant is not a purely open world title. You unlock new zones to explore freely as you progress the story. Each of these areas has different side quests and story moments associated with it. The issue here is that Nier Replicant doubles as a backtracking simulator. The amount of time wasted travelling between these areas is staggering. Fast travel is restricted to certain points in the map and not unlocked until quite late into the game. This is especially bad because the game will gladly have you travel back and forth on the regular. Side quest givers outright have no respect for your time, and this also happens in the main story as well. In fact, Yoko Taro clearly is aware of this, as Grimoire Weiss remarks in one of the quests about the endless fetch questing that you, the player, is seemingly all too happy to embark on. Apparently this was designed as a parody of how other games that get you to do all these inane quests such as collect 5 chicken eggs because well reasons. If it was just one quest like The Witcher had with that infamous frying pan saga, then this would be okay, harmless even, and Weiss's quip would be something that I could laugh at. That is not the case here. Whilst the citizens of Replicant are plagued by the Black Scroll, the players are far more affected by fetch quest after fetch quest. Parody is fine, but designing the bulk of your side quests in this way, if this was intentional, isn't a parody. It is just bad game design. Sorry Yoko, you still write amazing stories. And therein lies the problem. Because of the fantastic story, characters and world building, comparatively, the gameplay seems so much worse than it actually is. The combat is initially solid, if a bit unremarkable. Side quests offer some fun character interactions and support world building. However, multiple playthroughs shine a heavy spotlight on how little depth there is to combat. The initial awe and excitement of facing a new boss, as a pure gameplay spectacle, is lost on the second, third, fourth playthrough. In the same sense, the poor fast travel system and heavy volume of side quests makes the experience feel far more of an unnecessary time sink, which again is a shame, as the writing in these quests is generally excellent and expands on a bunch of interesting lore. The tragedy of Nier Replicant is that it's a victim of its own success. Even with this remaster, the gameplay cannot begin to compete with the excellent story and characters. A story told through multiple playthroughs and characters, delivered marvellously, but undermined by a gameplay system and open world structure that is painfully exposed by Yoko Taro's unrelenting commitment to delivering a powerful, unconventional narrative. And yet, despite not actually enjoying playing Nier Replicant, I'm still so grateful that I did. I have already given enough praise to the game's narrative and world. However, it does take a while for this narrative to develop. For me, I wasn't even hooked until my second playthrough. So what was it then that kept pushing me on to keep playing, despite not actually enjoying the gameplay. The characters. I mentioned earlier that every player has different gaming preferences, and there are certain factors that weigh more heavily in importance. For me, JRPGs and RPGs need to have good characters. If I'm committing 30, 40, even 80 plus hours to a title, I need a cast that I can resonate with, above all else. An RPG could have great gameplay, an interesting story, fantastic music, but if the cast is weak, then it will seriously hamper my experience. Take the recently released Scarlet Nexus as an example. I found the gameplay, story, music and graphics to all be very impressive, but the generic, tropey cast made it very difficult for me to care about the game. So much so, that I have no intention right now of doing a second playthrough with a completely new character and different story elements. It's crazy when you think about it. I went through Nier Replicant multiple times, despite not enjoying the gameplay, and the multiple playthroughs which are nowhere near as distinct as Scarlet Nexus's two paths. This comparison in my head made me realise just how important good characters are to me. Good characters, in my opinion, are what gives purpose to the other elements, like the gameplay and story. Whilst Nier Replicant's story is, on its own, still fantastic in concept and execution, the way it made me feel, the impact each twist and development had on me, it had that effect because of how invested I was in the characters. Every revelation, every emotional moment and shift in perspective is even more impactful because of how it affected the characters. Nier Replicant's cast is one of the most interesting, complex, and morally grey that I've personally experienced. Can't believe I've had to hold this in for over 20 minutes, but Grimoire Weiss, a talking freaking book, of all things, might just be my favourite video game character ever. The English voice actor absolutely delivers. Every sarcastic quip, every bit of banter with Nier, Kaine and Emil is delivered with such personality, just a cadence of the guy's voice. Mwah. Nier, or the otherwise unnamed protagonist, is someone who I thought would just be another blank slate, overshadowed by a more compelling cast. This is not the case. His relationship with Yona is so well developed, and through side quests too. The back and forth with Weiss, that starts off as bickering, later develops into a banter reminiscent of what you'd see between long-standing friends. His empathy towards Kaine, who's been completely ostracised from our own community. All of these interactions and relationships give meaning to the events of Replicant. Relationships form in an organic way, and it personally helped place me in the shoes of our young hero. Going even further, a reason I also cared so much about these characters, including the protagonist, is because they're not perfect. Yoko Taro's work has rightly been credited for dealing with morally grey issues, and in Replicant this is also explored through the characters. I don't intend to go deep into spoiler territory here, so all I can say is that I was incredibly impressed by how much the characters' beliefs and actions made me regularly reflect and even question my own opinions on them. One throwaway piece of dialogue stuck with me especially. During one of the game's many side quests, the party discusses someone cheating, which Nier plays off as being the kind of thing that just happens with attractive guys. Whilst potentially meant in jest, his nonchalant dismissal of the issue completely contrasted with Emil, Kaine and Grimoire's condemnation of it. I found this really stuck with me because I think, objectively, across society, cheating is not something to be proud of, or seen in any sort of good way at all. So the supposed hero of the narrative, casually downplaying the severity of someone cheating all the time, makes you question what his morals actually are, and how likeable he actually is. For a moment I genuinely sat there annoyed at what he said. This doesn't happen often in games for me. Now, this isn't explored further, but it speaks to how well Yoko Taro layers each of his characters. Every interaction between them feels purposeful. Because of the excellent writing and meaningful interactions, I wanted to take on as many side quests as possible, despite the deep gameplay flaws contained within them. This says a lot because I really didn't enjoy the nature of the side quests. However, my enjoyment of the characters overrid any disdain that I might have for the gameplay structure. This is the true tragedy. A beautiful story with thought-provoking themes and complex characters, confined to a mediocre video game. Nier Replicant is almost paradoxical, both worth experiencing, yet equally not worth playing. It doesn't consider the player's time, yet if you stick around and pay attention, it rewards you like not many other games do. I put this video together, this script, hoping to find answers to the many thoughts and feelings that this flawed masterpiece made me feel. I suppose the one definitive takeaway is that, if I love the characters, I'll put up with some gameplay flaws. And I am glad I experienced this game. Whilst the short-term experience wasn't always the most fun, the long-term effect this game had on me made it all feel worth it. If you have the time and patience for complex characters, with a fascinating story that hits you right in the feels, then Nier Replicant is something you have to experience. Just don't expect to want to go back to it once you're done with your 5 endings. Thank you for tuning in to this extended version of the gaming conversation. This was probably the hardest video to do, so if you enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate a thumbs up. If you disagree with me or have any other feelings on this game, please do comment below. I reply to comments regularly. And subscribe for more regular gaming critiques and discussions. Next up, we dive straight back into JRPG territory with Tales of Berseria, a game I adore so much. I've been Michael JH, and at times, absolutely perplexed by Yoko Taro's work. Peace.